Have you ever seen a woman call 911 over barbecue smoke? Because I have. And not just any woman. Karen Templeton, the self-declared queen of our HOA, president of Petty and Professional Fun Ruiner. It all started on a sunny Saturday morning in Whispering Pines when I fired up my smoker on the driveway, and the sweet smell of mesquite and hickory started drifting down the block like a love letter to anyone with taste buds. I was 3 hours deep into a 12-hour brisket, humming along to Johnny Cash and sipping a cold lemonade when I saw her coming. She was power walking with her little white dog named Muffin, dressed in her usual neon workout gear, armed with a clipboard and the energy of someone who files noise complaints during fireworks. She stopped dead in front of my driveway, her nostrils flaring like she could sniff out rule violations at 10 paces. I gave her a friendly nod and offered, "Morning, Karen. You want a sample? Still got 4 hours till it's perfect, but the bark's coming in nice." Her eyes narrowed like I'd just asked her to commit a felony. "This is a violation," she snapped. "You're not allowed to cook meat in the driveway. Open flames are a fire hazard. You're creating a public nuisance." I looked around at the peaceful suburban street where birds were chirping, kids were playing, and my smoker was gently puffing aromatic goodness into the spring air. "Karen," I said, "this ain't a bonfire, it's a smoker. Been using it for 20 years and never once burned down a lawn." She yanked out her laminated HOA ordinance sheet, which was indeed laminated, and jabbed her finger at a section she'd clearly memorized like gospel. No grilling, smoking, or cooking on driveways or front-facing areas of the property. Period. End of discussion. I wiped my hands on a towel and gave her a smile that had probably gotten me out of a dozen speeding tickets back in the day. "Well, I suppose we'll just have to agree to disagree until this brisket finishes." That did it. She gasped like I'd slapped her mother with a rib bone. "I'm calling the police," she hissed. And then, in full view of 3 neighbors, 2 kids on scooters, and Muffin, who looked like he desperately wanted a bite, Karen dialed 911. She wasn't even subtle about it. "Yes? I'd like to report an illegal open fire and a potential health hazard. Yes, he's on his driveway, with some sort of meat contraption. And there's thick smoke." Thick smoke. She made it sound like I'd summoned a smoke demon with beef sacrifices. 10 minutes later, a patrol car rolled up the street, lights off, windows down. Out stepped Officer Hernandez, a young guy, maybe late 20s, with a permanent expression that said, "Why me?" He took one sniff of the air, glanced at the smoker, then turned to me with a half grin. "You the fire starter?" I held up my tongs. "Guilty as charged. Want a preview bite?" Karen stomped forward like she was going to arrest me herself. "This is against HOA rules. He's in clear violation and refuses to cease." Hernandez held up a calming hand. "This is not a police matter. There's no open flame visible, no illegal activity, and frankly, it smells amazing." Karen's jaw dropped. "Are you serious? That's a fire hazard." Hernandez looked at her deadpan. "Ma'am, I've responded to arsons. This is a backyard barbecue with a front row seat." That's when Timmy Jenkins, the neighbor's 16-year-old with a TikTok addiction, started filming. Karen, red-faced and waving her HOA pamphlet like it was a legal warrant, screamed into the sky, "This entire street will smell like burnt flesh." Timmy uploaded the video before the officer even got back in his car. Caption: HOA Karen calls 911 on ribs. Within hours, it had racked up over 40,000 views. Comments ranged from "Let Jack cook" to "Muffin deserves better." Meanwhile, I went back to my brisket, humming again, as Karen huffed off, muttering something about bylaws and lawsuit. But here's what nobody knew. Not Karen, not Officer Hernandez, not even Timmy with his viral video. This wasn't just any barbecue. This brisket was destined for someone special. The mayor of our town had called me 2 weeks ago. She said she wanted to throw a surprise appreciation lunch for the first responders who'd worked through the big flood last month. And she wanted me, retired fire captain, backyard pitmaster, local legend, to cater the whole thing. No fanfare, no big announcement, just a quiet, heartfelt thank you for the people who had kept our city going through the storm. I didn't tell a soul, figured I'd smoke the meat at home and deliver it later that afternoon. But now, thanks to Karen's full-volume meltdown and Timmy's video, the entire neighborhood was sniffing the air and whispering about Jack's famous ribs. A couple of them started casually walking past my house, making not-so-subtle comments like, "Sure smells good out here," and "Bet that man knows how to cook." I just smiled and nodded, letting the smoke do the talking. Karen, on the other hand, wasn't done. Not by a long shot. She went home and fired off an HOA-wide email with the subject line, "Emergency code violation. Public safety at risk." She attached photos of my smoker, zoomed in so tight it looked like the grill was actively combusting. She demanded immediate disciplinary action and even threatened legal consequences if unlawful driveway cookery wasn't dealt with. I read the email while basting the brisket. My phone buzzed again with a message from my buddy down the street. "Dude, she just sent a mass email about your meat." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the sauce. That evening, as the brisket hit its final hour, a small crowd had gathered across the street. Lawn chairs were mysteriously unfolding. Someone brought a cooler. Timmy was live streaming. And Karen? She was pacing in front of her house, glaring like a dictator losing control of the Capitol. She hadn't even begun to realize what was coming next because, in less than an hour, the mayor would be pulling up. And Karen Templeton, queen of the HOA, guardian of the driveway code, sworn enemy of ribs, was about to find out exactly who Jack Benson was cooking for. And believe me, she wasn't going to like it one bit. The smell lingered into the afternoon, rich and smoky, a trail of slow-cooked glory curling through the cul-de-sac like it had a mission. By now, everyone within sniffing distance knew Jack Benson was cooking something special. What they didn't know was that the mayor herself, Diane Conness, was on her way. Not in her official car, not in a fancy motorcade, just a low-key black SUV and a pair of jeans, trying to stay under the radar while she picked up a tray of brisket for a private lunch meant to honor our town's first responders. It was supposed to be a quiet favor, no publicity, no speeches, just good food and gratitude. But Karen Templeton had other plans, and she wasn't going to let a driveway barbecue ruin her grip on the rules of Whispering Pines. Karen had spent the morning fuming behind her curtains, probably writing angry emails to the HOA board and sharpening her laminated rule book for battle. When that hadn't worked, she moved on to fines. By noon, a bright yellow envelope showed up taped to my front door, the kind usually reserved for parking tickets or IRS doom. Violation: unauthorized cooking activity. Fine: $150. Reason: smoke trespass and public disruption. I stood there in my apron, reading the note with brisket juice on my fingers, and actually laughed out loud. Smoke trespass, that was a new one. I could almost hear her muttering it to herself as she wrote it, like she was laying down the law in a courtroom drama. I didn't even bother removing it, just let it hang there in the breeze while I went back to slicing ribs for the mayor's lunch. But while I kept things calm, the neighborhood was splitting into camps. On one side, you had the HOA loyalists, mostly folks who feared retaliation from Karen or genuinely believed the fate of the subdivision rested on unblemished driveways. On the other side were my people, neighbors with taste, memories of cookouts past, and enough sense to know that the world wasn't going to end because someone smoked a brisket where their car usually sat. A few brave souls started trickling over, pretending to ask about the weather or how my garden was doing, but always with their eyes locked on the smoker. I gave out small bites here and there, just enough to fan the flames, figuratively speaking. One guy said it tasted like his childhood, another nearly teared up. Even old Mr. Cranston from 2 doors down, who hadn't spoken to anyone since 2019, gave me a thumbs up and mumbled, "That's the real deal." Karen, meanwhile, wasn't satisfied with a ticket. No, she had bigger ambitions. By 1 p.m., she'd sent out another email announcing an emergency compliance inspection for my property, citing concerns about illegal food distribution and unlicensed catering. I read it while stirring the baked beans and thought about how far someone would go just to make sure no one else was having a good time. She even included a blurry, zoomed-in photo of me holding a rib, circled in red like it was evidence in a federal case. I started calling her the sheriff of Sauce Patrol under my breath. And then, as if on cue, the mayor pulled up. No fanfare, no entourage, just a confident woman in dark glasses and a hoodie, stepping out of her SUV with the kind of stride that said she didn't have time for nonsense. She walked up my driveway like she'd done it 1,000 times, nodded toward the smoker, and grinned. "I could smell it 5 blocks away," she said. "Tell me it's ready." I chuckled, pulled the foil back just enough for her to see the mahogany crust and glistening smoke ring, and said, "Right on schedule." But before I could start loading trays into her car, a shriek pierced the air. Karen had spotted her. "What is going on here?" she barked, marching across the street like she was about to perform a citizen's arrest. "This is a restricted area. Unauthorized food service is strictly prohibited per Article 6, Section B of the HOA bylaws. The mayor turned slowly, lowered her sunglasses just enough to meet Karen's eyes, and said, "I don't believe I asked for your opinion." Karen blinked like someone had slapped her with a brisket sandwich. "Do you even live here?" she demanded, hands on hips. "Because if not, this is trespassing. I will call the HOA board." "I am the mayor," Diane interrupted, her voice cool and deliberate. "And this man is catering a private event I'm hosting. You want to file a complaint? I suggest you take it up with City Hall." "Good luck with that." Karen's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, like her brain had to reboot. I don't think she'd ever been so publicly neutralized before. Around us, neighbors froze, watching the showdown like it was the Super Bowl. Someone whispered, "Is that really the mayor?" And another person quietly cheered. Karen took one last look at Diane, who was now casually inspecting a tray of pulled pork, and retreated like a cartoon villain foiled in Act 1. She turned, yanked Muffin's leash, and disappeared into her house, probably to plan her next move with a glass of boxed Chardonnay. Meanwhile, the food was ready. I loaded the trays into the SUV with the help of Diane and one of her assistants, who showed up late with a folding table and an armful of thank you cards. The mayor thanked me again, handed me an envelope marked "Official Gratitude" with a little wink, and told me to keep doing what I was doing. "You've got more support than you know," she said, patting my shoulder. Then she drove off, taking with her enough meat to feed 30 people, a stack of fresh rolls, and the satisfaction of knowing she just stared down Whispering Pines' reigning tyrant and walked away victorious. But as the SUV disappeared around the corner, I knew this wasn't over. Karen didn't know how to lose, not quietly anyway. She was going to double down, call in reinforcements, maybe even bring out the big guns. County codes, health inspectors, threats of legal action. I'd seen people like her before when I was a fire captain. I once dealt with a guy who threatened to sue the city because we parked a fire truck in front of his house while putting out his neighbor's blaze. Same energy, same misplaced priorities. Still, as I sat back down in my lawn chair, the last wisp of smoke curling out of the smoker, I couldn't help but smile. The food was a hit. The mayor had my back. The neighborhood was waking up to the ridiculousness of it all, and Karen? She was scrambling. She'd played her hand too early, too loud, and too public. And the best part? We were just getting started. By the next morning, I figured Karen would have calmed down. Maybe slept it off. Maybe realized that calling 911 on smoked brisket and yelling at the mayor wasn't exactly the career move she thought it was. But nope, I underestimated her thirst for control. While the rest of the neighborhood was still buzzing from the showdown on my driveway, Karen was doubling down with the kind of manic energy usually reserved for reality TV villains and over-caffeinated cult leaders. At precisely 9 a.m., she sent out a neighborhood-wide email announcing an emergency HOA board meeting to address ongoing violations of community standards and the rapid decline of property value due to rogue barbecue activities. She even added a little clip art flame next to my name, like I was the fire emoji incarnate. The meeting was set for 6 p.m. in her living room. Normally, HOA meetings drew maybe 5 board retirees and someone looking for a lost cat. This time, half the neighborhood showed up. It was standing room only, with a couple folks bringing folding chairs and a few more bringing popcorn. Someone brought beer, which Karen tried to confiscate until she realized it wasn't technically illegal and she didn't have enough arms to write all the citations she wanted to. I walked in with my usual calm stride, wearing my grill sergeant apron and holding a small foil tray of smoked sausage bites. Because if I'm going to walk into a battle, I'm bringing flavor. Karen stood at the front, arms crossed, eyes narrow. Behind her was a portable projector pointed at a blank wall. The presentation title read, "The Barbecue Menace: How Meat Smoke is Destroying Our Community." I looked around the room. A few neighbors were already suppressing laughter. One guy had his phone out, clearly ready to record the whole thing. Karen cleared her throat and began with what might be the most aggressively boring PowerPoint ever assembled. Slide 1 was a blurry photo of my smoker taken from across the street, captioned, "Unlawful Smoke Device." Slide 2 was a screen grab from the viral TikTok video with her mid-scream face frozen in time. She didn't even realize it made her look like she was being attacked by invisible brisket. As she clicked through more slide charts about home value depreciation, quotes from fire safety websites taken wildly out of context, and one graph that looked suspiciously made up, murmurs grew louder. People were shifting in their seats, whispering, exchanging glances. And then she said it. the line that made this entire meeting infamous. If we allow this kind of behavior, smoking meats in plain view of the community, we open the floodgates to chaos. Today it's brisket, tomorrow it's open-air lobster boils. What's next? Deep-fried turkey in the cul-de-sac? We must protect the integrity of our neighborhood. There was a beat of stunned silence. Then somebody laughed, then another. Soon the whole room was chuckling, not loudly, but enough to throw Karen off her rhythm. Her face tightened like she'd bitten into a lemon rind. She tried to keep going, but the spell had broken. That's when I stood up, tray in hand, and said, "If I may, I brought a little something for the board." I walked up, set the tray on the coffee table next to her stack of bylaws, and lifted the foil. The smell of hickory and peppered sausage filled the room like divine intervention. Karen recoiled like it was toxic gas. "You can't bribe the board with meat," she snapped. "This is completely inappropriate." But it was too late. Someone took a bite, then another. Pretty soon, half the room had a piece. And right on cue, the door opened. In walked the fire chief, 2 uniformed first responders, and just behind them, Mayor Dianconis again. Casual clothes, no entourage, just a quiet smack and a to-go container in hand. Karen blinked, so hard it looked like her brain rebooted. What are you all doing here?" she stammered. "This is a private HOA meeting." The fire chief, who had about 15 more years of patience than I ever would, said calmly, "We're here on behalf of the community to support Jack Benson. He's been feeding first responders, veterans, and frankly, half your neighbors. And we wanted to clarify, there are no safety violations. We inspected his setup. It's safer than most kitchens." The mayor stepped forward, calm as ever. "Also, as a member of this community and someone with a vested interest in its spirit, I'd like to officially endorse driveway barbecue events as a form of community building." She paused, then added with a grin, "And if anyone wants to challenge that, I'd be happy to schedule a press conference." Karen stood there, lips twitching, hands frozen at her sides. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. "This is a mockery of our rules," she shouted. "A total undermining of order, of structure. What happens when people just start grilling wherever they want? This is the beginning of anarchy." That's when Timmy Jenkins, resident TikTok documentarian, whispered just loud enough to be heard. Anarchy never smelled so good. The room lost it. Laughter rippled through like wildfire. Karen, realizing she'd completely lost control, made her final mistake. She reached for the tray of sausage bites, trying to shove it off the table in some kind of dramatic last stand. But her sleeve caught the edge of a glass of iced tea, which tipped, hit a bowl of coleslaw, and sent the whole mess flying onto her HOA paperwork. The projector glitched, the laptop froze, and Karen stood there, coleslaw covered and gasping, the image of chaos she had so passionately warned us about. Nobody said a word for a second. Then the fire chief walked over, handed her a napkin, and said gently, "Maybe it's time to let the smoke clear." Karen stormed out, trailing bits of cabbage, followed by Muffin, who looked like he wanted to defect to our side. The meeting slowly dissolved after that. People lingered, chatting, laughing, grabbing one more bite of sausage. A neighbor tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You know, Jack, I think you just turned the tide of this entire HOA." I looked around the room, now slaw-streaked, but buzzing with camaraderie, and nodded. "This ain't about barbecue," I said. "It's about community, about knowing your neighbors, and maybe about a little pulled pork now and then." The war wasn't over yet. But after that meeting, one thing was clear. Karen's reign of terror was slipping, and I had a smoker full of reasons why. By the time the sun came up the next morning, Karen had already moved on to her next plan of attack. She wasn't the type to take public embarrassment lightly, and having coleslaw dumped on her HOA commandments while the mayor and the fire chief lauded smoked sausage 3 feet away was more than her pride could handle. She needed a new angle, something sneaky, official, and punishing. So she did what only someone drunk on power and boxed Chardonnay would do. She called the county health department and filed an anonymous complaint. Said there was an unlicensed food operation happening in Whispering Pines, something about open-air meat distribution and unsafe culinary practices on private property. She probably even threw in emotional distress from airborne paprika. Of course, she didn't sign her name, but everybody knew it was her. The woman was as subtle as a marching band in a library. I found out around noon when a white van pulled up in front of my house with a county logo on the side. 2 men stepped out, clipboards in hand, scanning my front yard like it was a crime scene. One of them, a younger guy with sharp glasses and a suspiciously wrinkle-free shirt, introduced himself as Inspector Delaney. The other one, older and slightly amused, was named Curtis. I invited them in like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Fellas," I said, gesturing toward the smoker already puffing out that slow hickory scent. "Hope you skipped lunch." They gave each other a look that said this wasn't what they were expecting. We went through the formalities. They asked to see where I prepped the meat, how I handled food storage, temps, waste disposal, all of it. I gave them the full tour. My outdoor kitchen was cleaner than most restaurants. I had gloves, thermometers, temperature logs, sealed bins, you name it. I'd spent years perfecting this setup, not because I had to, but because it was my passion. Retiring from the fire department gave me time to turn my backyard into a smokehouse paradise, and I wasn't about to let Karen Templeton, of all people, ruin that. Curtis started taking notes, nodding approvingly as I explained my routine. Delaney, on the other hand, seemed determined to find a flaw. He hovered around the smoker, took photos, measured distances from the street. "You aware," he said, adjusting his glasses, "that selling food without a license is a violation of county code?" I looked him in the eye and replied, "I am not selling anything. I donated brisket to the mayor's event, and I feed my neighbors when they stop by hungry. You want to find me for being generous? Be my guest." Curtis chuckled under his breath, and Delaney didn't respond. Instead, he opened the lid of the smoker and froze. Now, I don't want to brag, but the inside of that smoker was a thing of beauty. Brisket glistening with rendered fat, ribs resting in wrap, a pork shoulder just beginning to crust. You could smell the hours of patience, the science of smoke and spice in harmony. Delaney blinked like he forgot where he was. Curtis leaned in, took a deep breath, and said, "You got a name for this?" I smiled. "That one's the Carolina Sweet Fire, and the ribs are rubbed in a coffee-cocoa blend I've been perfecting since '03. Curtis looked at Delaney. "We're supposed to taste the product, right? Just to be thorough." Delaney hesitated, but curiosity got the better of him. "Technically, yes. For inspection purposes. So, I made them plates, just enough for sampling." I didn't say much as they chewed, but I could see it happening. The transformation, bureaucrats turned believers, one bite at a time. Curtis nodded like he'd just heard a sermon. Delaney tried to hide it, but he went back for seconds. By the end of the visit, I had 2 clean check marks on my inspection sheet, 0 violations, and a quiet apology from Curtis for the inconvenience. "Honestly," he said, wiping his mouth, "I've been to some real backyard nightmares. This is heaven." They drove off smiling. I watched them go, feeling the kind of satisfaction that only comes when you've beaten someone at their own game, without ever raising your voice. Later that day, the smell of Karen's rage could have overpowered the mesquite. Word spread fast about the inspection. I didn't even have to say anything. Neighbors who once stayed quiet started walking by my place, just to offer a thumbs up or yell, "Smells legal to me." Karen stayed inside, curtains twitching every time someone passed. But the universe wasn't done messing with her yet. Around sunset, just as I was getting ready to shut down the smoker, a commotion started across the street. I looked over to see smoke, real smoke, coming from Karen's backyard. I dropped my tongs and jogged across the street. A citronella candle, left too close to her dried-out planter box, had caught the mulch on fire. Flames were climbing fast, licking the edges of her patio furniture and threatening to spread to the side of the house. She was yelling into her phone, flapping a dish towel like it was going to do anything. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted back to my yard, grabbed the emergency hose I had coiled by the smoker, something I always kept around out of habit from my firefighting days, and ran back. In less than 2 minutes, the fire was out, her patio soaked, the flames smothered, and the danger gone. Karen stood there, dripping and stunned, looking at me like she couldn't decide whether to thank me or report me for trespassing. You just ran in," she said, voice shaking. "No gloves, no gear." I shrugged. "Old habits. And I keep that hose hooked up for moments like this. Smokers and safety go hand in hand." She nodded slowly, still processing the fact that the man she tried to destroy had just saved her house. "Thank you," she muttered, barely audible. I gave her a half smile. "Anytime. But maybe next time you see smoke, ask before you assume it's the end of the world." She didn't say another word, just turned and walked inside, hair soaked, slippers squishing, muffin trailing behind her, looking both traumatized and deeply confused. Back in my yard, I coiled the hose and cleaned up the smoker. The sun dipped below the trees, casting that golden evening glow that makes everything feel like a movie ending. But I knew we weren't done yet. The barbecue battle was winding down, sure, but the war for Whispering Pines? That still had one more chapter, and I had a feeling the final smoke was going to rise on my terms. A week after the fire on Karen's patio, things around Whispering Pines had shifted. Not all at once, not like someone flipped a switch, but slowly, like smoke drifting through the neighborhood, curling into places it hadn't reached before. People who used to keep their heads down were waving when they walked by. Folks I hadn't spoken to in years were showing up with questions about rubs, sauces, and when the next cookout might be. It was like someone had cracked open a window in a stuffy old house, and the fresh air was finally getting in. The great HOA barbecue saga wasn't just a neighborhood drama anymore. It was a turning point. And Karen? She wasn't taking it well. Her patio was still scorched around the edges. She tried covering it with a new outdoor rug and repositioning her furniture, but the damage was there, plain as day, like a bruise that wouldn't go away. People whispered about it, not out of cruelty, but because it was the kind of poetic irony that made you shake your head and laugh. The woman who declared war on my smoker ended up getting saved by the very man she tried to shut down. The same man whose brisket had fed the mayor, soothed the health inspectors, and united a block of suburbanites who had forgotten what it meant to share a meal. And then came the vote. Apparently, enough residents had signed a petition started by my neighbor's teenage son, of all people, to amend the HOA regulations. The proposed rule was to allow controlled, safe, community-friendly cooking appliances in driveways during weekends and holidays, but everyone just called it the Benson Brisket Amendment. It was supposed to be a joke, a bit of tongue-in-cheek rebellion against the clipboard tyranny we'd all grown used to. But the thing was, people liked it. They wanted it. For once, the rules weren't about control or fear. They were about permission to live a little, to talk to your neighbors, to eat something smoky and real. The HOA board met in the clubhouse, not Karen's house this time, because apparently even the board had grown tired of being barked at beneath motivational cat posters and shelves of porcelain angel figurines. This time, the room was packed again, but it felt different, lighter, optimistic. Karen still sat at the head of the table, but the crown was slipping. Her usual allies had gone quiet. One of them even brought a pulled pork sandwich and a paper towel and sat 2 rows behind her, unapologetic and hungry. I stood up to speak when they opened the floor. I wasn't planning on saying much, just enough to remind folks why this all started. But then I looked around and saw the faces. People I'd known for decades. People who had shown up for me when my wife passed. People who used to be too polite or too scared to push back. I took a deep breath and let the words come. I told them it was never about rules versus chaos. It was about balance, about knowing when to let common sense win over bureaucracy, about how community isn't measured in property values, but in who shows up when there's smoke in the air, whether it's from ribs or a fire on a neighbor's patio. When I finished, Karen tried to clap back with a speech of her own. Something about slippery slopes and noise pollution and how the smell of meat could offend vegetarians. But it fell flat. Her voice, once sharp and commanding, just didn't carry the same way anymore. People shifted in their seats, checked their phones, waited for her to be done. And when it came time to vote, it wasn't even close. 35 in favor, 6 against. The Benson Brisket Amendment passed, effective immediately. Driveway barbecues were no longer illegal. They were protected. The fallout was swift and glorious. First, Karen resigned from the HOA board. She claimed it was to focus on her personal health and gardening, but we all knew the truth. She couldn't stand being in a room where her voice no longer held sway. Her resignation email was 12 paragraphs long, full of dramatic flair and vague accusations of moral decline. Someone printed it and taped it to the community board at the clubhouse under the heading Karen's Last Stand. It disappeared a day later, but not before it made the rounds on social media. Her replacement was announced 2 weeks later. My granddaughter, Emily, who'd recently graduated from law school, had moved in with me temporarily while studying for the bar. She was smart, calm under pressure, and inherited just enough of my sarcasm to handle HOA nonsense with a smile and a pen. She'd quietly put her name in for the board election without telling me. When she won in a landslide, I nearly dropped my coffee. She stood in front of the whole neighborhood and said, "Let's make room for the things that bring us together instead of the rules that pull us apart." Then she promised monthly cookouts and even offered to teach Karen how to grill tofu if she ever wanted to try. Karen didn't respond. A week after the amendment passed, The mayor stopped by again, this time not for brisket, but to invite me to a city appreciation event. Said she wanted to publicly thank me for restoring order through smoked meat, which I thought was about the best compliment a man could get. She handed me a clock that read Citizen of the Season and gave me a wink as cameras flashed. I told her, next time, just bring a six-pack and an appetite. That evening, I hosted the biggest barbecue Whispering Pines had ever seen, legally this time. Tables lined the driveways. Kids rode bikes with hot dogs in hand. Someone brought a speaker, and before I knew it, we had dancing on the sidewalk and someone doing the worm on my lawn. A couple of firefighters showed up in uniform just for the free ribs. Even Curtis from the health department stopped by, plate in hand, ready for seconds. The whole neighborhood buzzed like we'd finally cracked the code on living well. As I stood by the smoker, flipping one last tray of ribs, I noticed Karen watching from her window. She didn't come out, didn't wave, just stood there with Muffin in her arms, expression unreadable. Part of me wondered if she regretted how far she took things. Maybe she did. Or maybe she was planning her next war. Noise violations, parking infractions, outlawing slip and slides. But it didn't matter. The tide had turned. I handed out the last plate, leaned against my fence, and looked out at the people laughing and eating, their faces warm in the glow of porch lights and citronella candles placed at a very safe distance. This was what it was all for. Not the rules or the votes or the meetings, but the moment when everyone felt like they belonged. I took a deep breath, letting the scent of oak and peppered bark fill my lungs. Then I grinned and muttered, more to myself than anyone else. Next time Karen wants to start a fire over barbecue, she better bring marshmallows. Because around here, we smoke problems low and slow.